next speaker is Mr. Max Blumenthal, who is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author whose articles and video documentaries have appeared in prominent publications. He will speak on his book, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel, which is a critical history of an increasingly extremist, racist, and militaristic state of Israel. Please welcome Mr. Max Blumenthal.
Thanks. Maybe I'll need these. I don't know. It's a lot of notes. I'm going to try to cover less history than Hatem did. I was just telling Hatem what a mistake it was to let him go first, because he's a hard act to follow, and there are few speakers I really enjoy listening to more, and it's really great to be back with AMP. I was just with you guys in Chicago, and I'll just have to follow you wherever you go. Thanks to Tahir for bringing me here. I want to pick up sort of where Hatem left off, but I first just have a few interesting anecdotes based on his conclusion. I just came across an old New York Times dispatch from Guatemala City. This was during the time when the Israelis were funding the genocidal regime of Ephraim Rios Montt and supplying him with weapons. Rios Montt declared that the Israeli soldier is our model during this time when he was exterminating and ethnically cleansing tens of thousands of indigenous Mayans. And actually the FMLN attacked the Israeli embassy in Guatemala City because they understood that the Israeli embassy was a key base of this authoritarian regime's support. And so the Israeli ambassador to Guatemala, whose name was Moshe Dayan, no relation to the eye-patched Moshe Dayan, but equally thuggish, actually said, "This is why we have to be in Lebanon." That was his quote to the New York Times. I see there's like a suppression attempt upstairs to suppress this speech. Maybe if you get closer to the mic, you won't compete with them. Am I not close enough? How's this? Better? And at the same time, of course, Israel was supporting the apartheid regime of South Africa, and I came across a fascinating conversation today that took place in 1985, I think the same year that the Israeli embassy was bombed in Guatemala, between the foreign affairs director of the South African government, J.J. Becker, and Aharon Shamir, who was a journalist for Yediot Aharonot, which is the most influential and widely read newspaper in Israel. And he was a former member of the terrorist Irgun, the Stern Gang, which bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, committed the Deir Yassin massacre, etc. And Shamir's offering Becker advice because Israel found its shared values in apartheid South Africa. And he told him, he told Becker, "Why do you not seem to be giving those rights by not really giving them?" And Becker was confused. And he asked, how do you give rights without giving them? And Shamir said, "Take Israel. I'm ready to give the Arabs equal rights, but not now, not today. But we can say that after 10 or 20 years, once we have allowed the Arabs to try out their rights, they might be ready for full and equal rights with the Jews in Israel." And then he went on, the old Irgun fighter, to suggest, give the blacks the vote very slowly. See how it works, bit by bit. Explain your course of action. Stress that it has never been done before. If you see that your bit-by-bit approach is not working, change it, but make the world believe you are sincere. You have to be hypocritical to survive. You have to be hypocritical to survive. Well, 5 years later, the apartheid regime of South Africa collapsed. No one expected that to happen. The indigenous people of South Africa and of Southern Africa were not willing to wait. They saw through the hypocrisy, and the world came to see through the hypocrisy very quickly. The regime collapsed with a combination of an international boycott and, don't read the obituaries of Mandela in the New York Times, which declared that he used peaceful means. There was an armed struggle. There were groups like SWAPO, which were attacking the regime of Rhodesia. There was the Cuban army, which was sent to Angola to fight the South African army, and there was an armed struggle inside South Africa. So through all these means, the apartheid regime of South Africa collapsed. Meanwhile, this apartheid regime of Israel remains, and it is the subject of my book, Goliath, which is for sale in the corner. You can see Ali Abunema manning the table right now. It's $25. I can't take credit cards. And my book depicts this single regime of apartheid that controls Israel-Palestine at a very terminal phase, which is continuing its strategy of hypocrisy for survival. Avigdor Lieberman was just speaking at the Brookings Institute in Washington, and of course there were no attempts to shut him down, although there were fervent attempts to stop my speech that same week at the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C., even though I have no interest in ethnically cleansing people and no power to do so. And Lieberman declared before the entire Washington press corps, who are all live tweeting him as though he's some legitimate figure, that he sees a value in continuing peace talks with Abbas. He called Abbas a liar. He called Abbas corrupt. He called the Palestinian Authority worthless and denied that there was even an occupation. But he said we have to continue these talks because these talks are essential for us to manage the conflict perpetually. And so he revealed Israel's entire strategy right there. And that has been the strategy from the beginning. The beginning was, as Hatem said, not 1948. It was not the Nakba. The beginning was 1893, when the first ideological settlers arrived in Palestine through the second Aliyah. The first Aliyah was carried out through Baron von Rothschild, who was doing what Napoleon was attempting to do, which is to negotiate with the Brits by moving Jews into Palestine to help relieve the tension of anti-Semitism in Europe. And he was doing it for economic reasons, not ideological reasons, but of course the negotiation with anti-Semites was part and parcel of the entire project. So in 1893, there are people moving to Palestine who are determined to actually physically remove the indigenous people and concentrate them, ghettoize them, or expel them entirely, and consolidate their grip over this land with the goal of building an ethnically pure Jewish state, although they couldn't quite define what Jewish meant. And most of these people were atheists who were at the same time messianic. Their model was the tower and stockade. To create facts on the ground, Palestinians would be removed either through underhanded negotiations through the Jewish National Fund, where land was bought from absentee landlords from the Ottoman Empire who were maybe living in Lebanon. But in any case, the tower and stockade became a fact on the ground. In other words, walls were built, wooden walls and a tower, and then people were moved inside who were known as the kibbutzim, kibbutznikim. A kibbutz was established, and these were planted all around Palestine, strategically around Arab settlements, planning for conquest, planning for 1948. The Zionist movement, the labor wing of the Zionist movement, employed the strategy of kibush ha'avodah, which means the conquest of labor. And this meant employing strategic boycotts. The Zionist movement are the ultimate boycotters. Strategic boycotts of businesses that employed Arabs, Jewish businesses that employed Arabs, break down coexistence, and prepare for conquest. This also meant attacking marketplaces that sold Arab products, even attacking Jewish housewives who bought tomatoes and oranges grown on Arab farms. At the helm of this movement, behind this whole movement of kibush ha'avodah, was a man named David Green. Well, that's his real name when he was living in the frozen tundra of Lithuania. He changed his name to David Ben-Gurion when he moved to Palestine and embraced this messianic vision. He became the head of the Histadrut, which was the main labor union of the labor Zionist movement, which embraced the strategy of kibush ha'avodah. And Ben-Gurion understood that to build this kind of ethnically pure Jewish state, he needed to employ a brand of socialism that was limited to Jews only, and that the best way to do this was to put him, and the best way to prepare himself for the leadership of the state, to become the founding father of this state, was to get to the helm of the main union. So unionism is supposed to be about solidarity, so is socialism. But Ben-Gurion crafted a very peculiar anachronistic vision to prepare for conquest. And in 1937, he wrote an eerie letter to his son Amos, in which he foreshadowed what would come down the pike 11 years later. He wrote, "We can no longer tolerate that vast territories capable of absorbing tens of thousands of Jews should remain vacant, and that Jews cannot return to their homeland because the Arabs prefer that the place," and he's referring to the Nakab here, "remains neither ours nor theirs. We must expel Arabs and take their place. Up to now, all our aspirations have been based on an assumption, one that has been vindicated throughout our activities in the country, that there is enough room in the land for the Arabs and ourselves. But if we are compelled to use force, not in order to dispossess the Arabs of the Negev, the Nakab, or Transjordan, but in order to guarantee our right to settle there, our force will enable us to do so." And of course, Ben-Gurion became, in 1948, after over 100 Palestinian villages were already demolished and their residents were expelled, the head of the transfer committee, which sought to plan and orchestrate, carefully calculate the final stage of ethnic cleansing, which is known as Plan Dalit, which was revealed to a wide audience by the Israeli revisionist historian Ilan Pappé. And you know, there is no at this point, the older generation of Israelis, the remainders of the founding generation, have very little compulsion about admitting that they carried out a campaign of massive ethnic cleansing in 1948. And although they may not admit that this was the goal along, they may not admit that it was orchestrated through something like the Transfer Committee, but the key commander in the southern theater of the 1948 war, Yitzhak Pondek, who commanded forces in the Nakab and was responsible for much of the ethnic cleansing that filled Gaza with refugee camps and sent thousands upon thousands of refugees to Egypt and Lebanon, wrote an autobiography. And he talked about his autobiography in an interview with Haaretz. And he declared, he explained his euphoria, the euphoria he felt as he sent thousands of Palestinians away towards Gaza. He said, "My heart is singing. There were 200 Palestinian villages here, and there are no more. It was necessary to destroy them. Otherwise, there would have been here another million Arabs among us. After 2,000 years of exile, one cannot create a state by using silk gloves." So there is an admission among the commanders and among many intellectuals, Israeli liberals like Benny Morris, that 1948 happened as we understand it did. But they justify it on the basis that it needed to happen in order for this Jewish state to be created. Ari Shavit, who has become kind of the toast of the town in Washington, he is a liberal Zionist columnist for Haaretz and was welcomed in Washington and New York by David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker. He was on Charlie Rose with Jeffrey Goldberg and Remnick. He was welcomed in New York at the 92nd Street Y, which will never host me for, you can't pay them any amount of money to let me in through their doors. Shavit wrote a fascinating article in the New Yorker, and he has a book out called My Promised Land, which is being praised by the New York Times, which, if you went in there and offered them $1 billion, they wouldn't review my book. And this all comes down to a simple idea. Shavit wrote about the ethnic cleansing of Lydda, where tens of thousands of Palestinians were sent on the death march to Ramallah. And he declared that this happened, and it was horrible, that there was a massacre in the Dahmash Mosque. He didn't acknowledge that the men who were brought in as volunteers to take the rotting bodies out of the Dahmash Mosque in the July heat were then shot in the graves they dug. But nonetheless, he did acknowledge that this happened. And then he went on in the pages of the New Yorker, which all my liberal intellectual friends read and take as gospel, that it needed to happen, because if it didn't happen, he wouldn't have been able to be born. And in any case, the issue is too immense for him to grapple with. This is what Ari Shavit's argument comes down to, and it's what the mentality of many on the liberal wing of the Zionist political spectrum in Israel believe. This is how they understand the Nakba. It happened, let's get over it, As Thomas Friedman said in the New York Times, Palestinians need to get over it and not focus eternally on their suffering. The problem is that the Nakba is an ongoing, continual process that is occurring every day before our eyes. And this is what Ilan Pappé recently said on our panel at AMP in Chicago, that there hasn't been a day in the entire history of the State of Israel that ethnic cleansing has not occurred. This is also understood, now you all understand this, but this is understood by Avigdor Lieberman, of course, from an alternate, opposite perspective, that 1948 happened, but it was an incomplete process, and that the State of Israel needs to finish 48 because the goal, as it always has been since 1893, is an ethnically pure state. Only through an ethnically pure state can Israel experience true democracy, because it has always been democracy for Jews only, and a democracy without any resistance or outside criticism. And so this is the source of Lieberman's support. This is why he may be the next prime minister of Israel by 2017. The Israeli media is already preparing for Lieberman as the next prime minister. He's already the foreign minister, Israel's top diplomat. It's why the religious nationalist camp is getting votes, and why the Labor Party, the party founded by David Ben-Gurion, is diminished and marginalized, why the left wing of the Zionist spectrum is moving into obsolescence. Because the real voice of the Jewish Israeli public and of the Jewish Israeli youth, the post-Oslo generation, is crying out to finish 48. And you hear the cries to finish 48 in the Prover Plan, the plan to remove and ethnically cleanse 40 to 70,000 indigenous Bedouin in the Nakab, in the Negev desert, and force them onto Indian reservation-style towns, which represent the only towns the State of Israel has ever been allowed to be built for Arabs, and which exist at the bottom of the socioeconomics ladder, as our Indian reservations do. Lieberman declared of the Prover Plan that nothing has changed since the Tower and Stockade days. We are fighting for the lands of the Jewish people, and there are those who intentionally try to rob and seize them, referring to the indigenous people of Palestine. For Lieberman and for the right wing and for the mainstream of the Israeli public, which has established this permanent right-wing majority, which will remain permanent unless the status quo changes, the days of 1893 are today. The settler-colonial project is not complete. We hear the cries of finish 48 in the state-appointed rabbis, the key state religious authorities who issued dual letters, the first one which declared that it is illegal under Jewish law to rent to non-Jews, and the second declared that it is illegal for Jews and Arabs to have relationships. And we see it in the burgeoning anti-miscegenation movement that they inspired, the movement led by Lehava, the former deputies of the racist Rabbi Meir Kahane, who have established a hotline that allows callers to inform on interreligious and interethnic couples, that has an SOS Coast Guard that allows volunteers to warn Jewish women on the beach not to talk to Arab men, that puts posters around Jerusalem warning Arab men not to talk to Arab women. And we hear it in the cries of the youth who beat Jamal Julani, the 19-year-old Palestinian resident of Jerusalem, into a coma because he had supposedly made a pass at a 15-year-old Jewish girl who had later admitted she was lying. Echoes of a submerged past in the United States, the past of the lynching that recalls the lynching of Emmett Till, a past that in Israel, in the words of William Faulkner, is not even past. We hear the cries to finish 48 in the politics of Naftali Bennett, the economics minister of Israel, the head of the Jewish Home Party, the third largest party in Netanyahu's governing coalition, who recently endorsed a decision by the National Civil Service Administration to bar religious Jewish women from volunteering in Israeli hospitals for fear that they would date Arab doctors, which is highly unusual to many American Jews like me, since we were raised to believe that dating doctors was a good thing. We hear the cries to finish 48 in Naftali Bennett's blueprint for annexing 60% of the West Bank, Area C, giving Jordanian residency to all Palestinians in Area A, then forcing all Palestinians in Area C to take loyalty oaths to the State of Israel or lose their ability to live there. And this is what's coming. And we see it in the attacks on the villagers of Susia, who are being deliberately forced to pack up and move into Yatta, so that Jewish settlers can move on to their lands in tandem with the Prover Plan. And we see it in the plans of the World Zionist Organization, which has recently announced a plan to settle 100,000 Jewish Israelis in the Galilee inside the Green Line to quote-unquote balance the demographic threat of the Arab population in the Galilee, who happen to be Israeli citizens, just as the Bedouins of the Negev are. And we see the calls to finish 48 in those who seek to suppress this discussion we're having today, who fear that this ethnic cleansing that has occurred since 1893, this continuous process, may one day be reversed, and that all of us who are trying to meet on this field of right doing may actually be able to install a regime of equality in historic Palestine that may be able to allow Jewish Israelis to be indigenized, to end their crisis, and may allow refugees to be able to return and visit Jerusalem and visit their homes and resettle. This is their greatest fear. Their greatest fear is not rockets from Hezbollah. Their greatest fear is not rockets from Hamas. Their greatest fear is democracy. And behind that, gestating Palestinian fetuses. And so here we are at a conference that has been attacked by Stand With Us, an extreme group of pro-Israel thugs who I understand have created enough pressure to reschedule the dinner. And I guess we're going to meet later on in a tent across the street. It's rainy and it's cold out. And this is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. I understand there was a letter from Stand With Us, and the letter cited a blacklist by the Anti-Defamation League, which this organization has been on. And the letter cited the presence of Ali Abu Nema, an advocate of equality in the Holy Land. And the letter apparently cited me. Of course, it's an honor. It's a badge of honor to be on this letter. But I think it's symbolic that we'll be put out in a tent. These thugs love to put people out in tents. But what we have here is a big tent. We have a big tent that welcomes everyone who favors equality. And our tent continues to grow as their narrow perspective continues to shrink, and they continue to retreat further and retreat from the field of right doing. So I just want to say that it's going to be an honor to meet you in our big tent. Let's keep this tent growing. Thank you.